Okay, so Friday night in shop, we're editing a massive video for you guys. So that's in the works. So as much as we wanted to release that this weekend, we're gonna release this one. And she's a doozy. The 1993 Caterpillar Swap F350. Was it worth it? And how much did it cost? Let's get into it. Here we go. Okay, so if you guys are following the channel, you know that we do engine swaps. If you don't follow the channel and you're seeing this for the first time, we basically take an engine from something and put it into something else, whether that be for more power, uniqueness, fuel savings. We've done quite a few across the board. So we've done Duramaxes, LS's, Coyotes, Cummins, a Magnum, Detroit, 2-strokes, and a few more. But we decided to put a 3126 Caterpillar in a 1993 F350. Now, if you go back into the channel, there's a couple videos of me saying that I don't like Fords. And that stemmed from being in the trade while 5.4 Tritons ran rampant with spark plugs blowing out of holes and cam phasers destroying engines, and the 6.0 and the 6.4 diesels that were in the heavier trucks. With working on those all the time and also working on Duramaxes and Cummins of the same era, I really did not like Fords, and that was my feelings, but we understand that my experiences were not your experiences. You maybe had those same trucks and had great experiences with those trucks, and that turned you off of me because I said that Fords were not my favorite. So way back, I think it was in 2018, I saw a post on Instagram of a buddy that we follow who was selling this mint 1993 crew cab long box F350 for 4,000 bucks. Now this was way before they jumped into ridiculous prices. So I looked at Aaron, the editor, who's the guy holding the camera, and I said, hey, what do you think about flying down to California, buying this thing? We're gonna be in the area because of meetings anyway, and driving this thing home because we should put a Ford on the channel. I have no issues with pre-1997 Ford trucks and cars. They were great, reliable, and I love the looks of those square bodies. Now, Jose had some tires on there off a Hummer, 16.5-inch rims. I don't know what size the tires were, but just the stance that it was, we saw those pictures and I thought, you know what, that is a good looking truck. Perfect for our families right now. Aaron and I both have kids. So getting into it though, it was cheaper because it had the 460 gas, and the 7.3s were already a little bit more money, but that gave us the perfect excuse to pull that engine and put something unique in there. So we flew down to California, checked the truck out during the meetings. We flew back a couple months later and drove the truck home. So there's an expense with that, but if you are thinking about doing any swap, any type of work, extensive work that involves making a vehicle your own, you have to get a decent donor. If you live in the Rust Belt, if you live in the upper half of the United States, do the road trip, go down south and get a nice rust-free, clean vehicle to start with. So we're gonna go through our list of everything that it costs to build this truck, but if you can't budget in a clean truck to start with, a lot of this is in vain. If you saw the 4BT Tahoe that I built for my wife, really great vehicle, excellent mileage, same amount of power as the 5.3 that was in there with about half the fuel that it took to run it. It rotted away because it was a Southern Ontario truck. After 3 years, I had holes and it was unsafe. I didn't want to spend months doing body work on that to get it up to par. So that being said, let's get into the actual cost of the truck. Okay, so we live in Canada, but for the sake of the video, we're gonna do everything in US prices, mainly because all the parts that we buy generally comes from the States and our larger audience is from the United States. So for all intents and purposes, all of this is converted to US. So if it was in Canada, you add times it by 1.3, I don't know, dollar's crazy. But it costs a lot more. Makes me feel better saying it in US. These numbers are as accurate as we can make them. We're not trying to inflate or deflate anything. This is to the best of our knowledge without waking up our accountant to get exact numbers. Of course, everything would be a little bit more now because everything's gone up, so keep that in mind. All right, let's get into it. So we bought the truck for $4,000, and I think In 2018, fuel was still reasonable. We spent about $1,100 to $1,300 in gas driving that home. I remember the bill at the end, making sure that it was cheaper to drive it home than it was to ship it home. It being a crew cab long box, we did look into shipping it home, but nobody wanted to ship it because it being 23 feet long, it meant that we would almost have to pay for 2 spots on a car carrier rather than just the one. So including hotels and everything else, we probably were able to drive it home from California to Canada, about 4,000 miles. For around $2,000, probably $2,500 with food and whatever else. So we did put Toyo tires on it in California, open country RTs, and those came to $1,600. Excellent tires. The open country AT3s are much better in the snow and the rain. Just keep that in mind. We tried both tires. If I did it again, I'd probably put the AT3s on the F350 as well, but they got these nice big meaty lugs on it. It does look really sick. I highly recommend that. Any vehicle that you buy, whether it is $1 million or $50, a flat tire will leave you by the side of the road, and that is not desirable. So if they're older than 4 years, do yourself a favor and replace those tires. Now, to get it across the border for us Canadians, we pay taxes on $4,000 US, $500 Canadian, importing that vehicle in. The plates on the truck were still good from California, so we were able to drive all the way across California legally with the plates. Insurance was an issue though, because Haggerty will not insure a F350. I don't think they'll even do a 250. Anything older than 25 years, Haggerty will insure for dirt cheap, usually a couple $100 for the year, but they would not do the F350. We did not know that, and I think we were very green at this at the time, and I think we actually drove all the way across the United States without insurance. Don't do that. I did get pulled over for speeding in a construction zone, not having insurance, not being able to prove that the truck was ours, and I think there was 1 or 2 other things. But if you talk nice and be polite, tell them you're Canadian, hey, and you're just passing through, generally the policemen in the States are very, very nice.
Hello, sir. How are you doing?
Now that we're back in Canada, we're originally going to throw in a 7.3, and we were going to do a newer 7.3, but when we got to the scrapyard, being our excellent sponsors of ours, they said, we have a 7.3 here for you that we stepped up to the side, but we also got a school bus that just rolled in, and it has a 3126 Caterpillar in it, and they said, why don't you put a Caterpillar in an OBS? And I said, that's right, why don't we? So we made the deal. We ended up trading just scrap weight that I had laying around in the shop and traded it for this bus engine. So we pulled the bus off in their yard and took the frame and the engine and transmission home as it was. And I highly recommend that you buy something complete, whatever you're gonna swap into, because then you know you have every piece of wire that you need to make it run. So if you take that exactly out and put it back in the way it was, you will have a running, moving truck. And that's the only real way to guarantee that. Now, quick recap, if you're getting a Caterpillar from a school bus, they are derated. They are 190 horse and they are limited in speed because they don't want your kids going down the highway at 190 miles an hour. They did have a GMC top kick there that had a higher horsepower rating. That engine was complete toast. We could not get that engine running. And we wanted that just for the ECU, wiring harness, turbo, and the injectors so that we could have those as cores to buy new ones. That was a big problem and fault on mine because the years were different, and that ended up messing up with the transmissions later in that, but we'll get to that. So we ended up with 2 Caterpillar 3126s for about the cost of $1,500, both of them assuming they were cores. Okay, so from here we dropped the engines off at Northtown Machine. With us going this in-depth into the project, we wanted to open the engines up and rebuild them so that we knew that we had something good and reliable. We're building this truck to haul our race car around, and we'll be fixing and wrenching on the race car long enough. We don't want to be wrenching on the haul truck while we're doing that. So if you are doing the swap, doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go rebuild the engine, but us also making an income off of YouTube, it made sense. So we dropped the engines off and told Scott to use the best parts of both. If one head was better than the other, use that head, put the 2 engines together, and give us one good engine when we're all said and done. Now the Cat is a sleeveless engine, meaning that it is a parent bore, same as a Cummins is. So you cannot pull the sleeves out and replace new sleeves. So if your sleeves are worn, you have to bore it out and put larger pistons in there, or bore it big enough to drop a sleeve in to go back to stock. Luckily, that school bus engine was never worked very hard, and those bores were in great shape. There was a huge ring lange on the Kodiak engine. So we got lucky with not having to do any major machining to the block other than a hone. And we took the best pistons, which were out of the school bus, and also the cylinder head, and rebuilt those. If you're looking at a 6-cylinder engine, the machine work for that varies, and I can't speak for Scott. Now that is just the machining and building a long block. The cost of the turbo, injectors, and all of your other parts are on top of that. And that ended up being still $6,000?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so we traded the labor of building the entire engine for the Mustang. Now the Mustang didn't have an engine in it. The Coyote that was in there is now in that Bronco behind us, and that's why we bought that car. We didn't have any emotional attachment to that car, so we traded a freshly painted, really good shape Mustang for the labor to build the engine, which is about $6,000. Now we ended up buying all the parts for the engine through Scott. So that is the gasket kit, new Huey pump, turbo, the injectors, sleeves for the injectors, and a few other small odds and ends. And that came to $6,000. So we've got about $12,000 into a brand new Cat engine. Now what? This engine puts out at a high tune 330 horsepower and about 860 foot-pounds of torque. That's pathetic. The new trucks put out almost 500, well over 1,000 foot-pounds of torque. You are absolutely correct. With a 330 horsepower and 860 foot-pounds of torque, we are pulling a 28-foot race car trailer that's probably about 8,000 pounds. That is plenty for this truck. If we start doing any more than that, all we're looking in is a higher cost of transmissions, tires, spinning U-joints, braking points. We want to build a reliable truck that is not doggy to be able to pull our race car 10, 15, 20 hours away in a comfortable setting that's unique and nobody else has. Now transmission, we really lucked out on transmission, and we found Excalibur in Connecticut, I believe. And they do nothing but rebuild Allisons, and they can build them to your spec, however much horsepower and torque you want to put into it. We went with mid-grade, I think, which is red. And that is good for between 800 and 1,000 foot-pounds, somewhere around there. For $4,200 all in, we delivered the transmission there. And this was during COVID, so we smuggled it across the border and got a buddy who lived close by to bring it there. They rebuild the transmission and ship it back to us for $4,200. Now I highly recommend looking them up for whatever project you do, whether it's Cummins or Power Stroke, because the adapters come off of the transmission so that you can put it behind whatever you want. That comes with a new torque converter, I believe a new valve body, don't quote me on that, new wiring harness for sure. And what they do is the 2000, because it's in a school bus, is only a 4-speed with no overdrive and 2-wheel drive. And no parking crawl. The parking brake is on the drive shaft. So included in that price, they added a parking crawl. They upgraded it to newer Duramax Allison goodies inside. They changed the tailstock so that it adapts to a transfer case that you would find behind an Allison behind a Duramax, and a new torque converter in that as well. On top of that, they unlock 5th gear so that now you have overdrive. They can turn it into a 6-speed by doing another valve body, but then you have to get it tuned, and that adds a significant cost to that, so we opted not to go for that. So of the entire truck build, the transmission was probably the most inexpensive and had no issues with anything that Excalibur did, so highly recommend looking them up if you want to rebuild a school bus engine. Now the transfer case we bought used off of Marketplace for 400 bucks. And that was a manual transfer case. We wanted to do that because I didn't want to do it with any electronics. So we got the shifter on the floor that puts us in 4-wheel drive. Now, we had a show to go to, and I did not have time to rebuild it. I didn't want to take it apart again afterwards, so I sent it to my transmission shop, who has rebuilt entire transmissions for me locally for the cost of $1,500, $2,000. So I wasn't too worried about them. They ended up rebuilding this transfer case, and we got the bill back, and it ended up being $1,800 for the transfer case. Now that I wish I could have done myself, because they are not complicated. You take them apart, you buy new bits for it, you put it back in it again, you do the pump upgrade, and you're all set. But that was a huge expense that was unfortunate. For the time that it took, we probably could have left the transfer case alone with a little bit of a sloppy chain, and the amount of times that we're gonna drive that thing in four-wheel drive is so limited that we probably would never even use it. It's not a winter truck, and we're on the highway just trucking to where we gotta go. When we get stuck or we gotta pull somebody else out, we'll use four-wheel drive, but that was a big expense. We also bought a support bracket for $266. That goes on top of the transfer case and bolts the transmission, and that's just an extra little bit to keep the torque down and give it that extra strength so that it doesn't break. The rear drive shaft, now that was an aluminum drive shaft because we're such a long truck, and the drive shaft shop didn't even want to weld the aluminum. We got our buddy Vince to do it, who is an amazing welder. So we grabbed all the parts from the drive shaft shop, had Vince weld it and brought it back. They balanced it and installed that, and that was $700. The front drive shaft ended up costing us more than it should have because we took the drive shaft from the GM, which has a fixed front axle, meaning that it's got the independent suspension on the front. We now have a full solid axle, meaning our axle goes up and down. Now I thought that it would slide in and out on the transfer case and that would be our change of distance, but our audience recommended that we didn't do that and we put a slip yoke in there. So after we had the drive shaft made, we had to send it back and get a slip yoke put in there to compensate for that front axle going up and down without taking out the transfer case. Cheap insurance that we had to do, so that ended up costing us $600 US in total. For suspension, we didn't do anything extra yet, only because we want to get it running and driving and worry about the suspension stuff after it. So the best we did was some Bilstein shocks for $480. That did all four corners, and we added Firestone airbags for $680. That allowed us to take a little bit of that extra weight off of that front leaf spring, and we added it in the back just in case when we put a trailer on it. Now we've got a leveling kit. That is not a leveling kit on there. We have buttons inside that we raise and lower to add more air suspension, and there's cheap little Amazon solenoids which have been working good so far that will put a certain amount of air into it. They were only $20 each, not worth mentioning, but the whole air ride system with the airbags and mounting and everything was about $700 US. Okay, so now that we got the engine back from Scott, we did do a couple more extra things. We got a balancer for the front, which was $600 because everybody on the internet said that our balancer needed to be replaced, and a lot of you guys are smarter than us, and if one person says it, if 20 people say it, there's some merit to it, so we replaced the front balancer. We also added a Parker filter to it to protect our Huey. So that's a filter that goes in between the Huey pump and the injectors. That way if the Huey pump fails, the filter will catch the shavings and save all our brand new injectors. The injectors were very expensive. They do make kits for those, but they're a couple grand. We found a Parker filter on eBay for dirt cheap. It was like $100. And then with shipping and everything, we're only about $200 into that filter, and then some lines from V&R, but we'll get into that later. You need to have a filter that's capable of 4,000 PSI though, because that's what the Huey system puts the oil pressure to fire the injectors. So a cost that not too many people budget in on their build is the fuel lines, and then we had extra lines on it as well for hydraulic lines. When I'm talking about hydraulic is the power steering lines, the brake booster lines from the transmission to the cooler, and we had all of those made at V&R, but they add up fast. So all the plumbing just to get all the liquids inside, all the plumbing for the radiator hoses came to between $1,000 and $1,200. I'm gonna say $1,200 because we added some extra stuff. We also have a receiver dryer on it off a transport truck, airlines on it. So we're at the higher end. You probably won't be as much if you're doing a swap. You can even get away with plastic airlines and nuts and furrows, which is a super cheap way to do it. Nothing wrong with that. Transport trucks use airlines because they're coated with Teflon on the inside all the time. But we wanted really nice hand fittings and wanted this looking nice and neat and tidy when we put it away. We did use just the plastic airlines for our air system on it because the Cat Kodiak had the air compressor on it. We do have a full air compressor, air dryer, air tanks, and we have onboard air available for it, but that adds up pretty quick. We had to replace the governor on the compressor. That being said, we're at the $1,200 mark. Getting into the next chunk of parts, we have another sponsor as well, Tuesley Auto Wreckers, and they had a 2008 F550 in the yard, and it was pretty well depleted. The power stroke is no good. Obviously it's a 6.4. We took that truck to get a bunch of the parts off of it. So that being free, we wheel and deal with Andy. That's his skid steer behind me, and I'm fixing that pro bono because that works for all of us. And then I get to use the skid steer when we need it. That's also another video on the heavy duty channel, so check that out. That's coming up quickly. But getting back to it, we basically have a 550 6.4 power stroke for free. I took the entire wiring harness out of that, and I also used the firewall out of that, and I used the dash out of that, so we could have an updated interior in the truck. Now that took care of my headlights, my HVAC, and my taillights, and wipers, and that's about it. The engine is a standalone, but the issue with the power stroke wiring for a Super Duty is that it needs to have the dash, the engine computer, transmission computer, and the body control module all connected and talking to each other before they will work. So I messed with that for a week before realizing that I should start over, and I went out and found a Super Duty gas truck local that was a 350 with the same dash and the same wiring harness more or less, and pulled that entire wiring harness out of that. So that truck, I think I paid him $200 for the wiring harness out of that and a couple odds and ends things. Now we were able to add keyless entry and power windows, so that was not a bad thing, whereas the 550 was a plain Jane crank handle work truck, but we got about $800 say into the wiring of that section. All right, so for the interior, I didn't like the seats. The seats were not that comfortable, so we updated it with a King Ranch interior out of a 2008 F150. That was $1,200 US. Plenty of room in the crew cab for the whole family. That's not an issue. Now the gauges were, we probably could have moved the sensors over from the F350 gas jobber and made the dash work, but we went with a Holley dash instead. And that was because that one's totally customizable to include EGTs, all the air pressures, fuel pressure, all the extra stuff that we did. So we're monitoring over a dozen things in that dash, and that also does the speedometer through GPS and does it all at once. That is a little bit more expensive, $24.50 for the standalone kit. That lets you plug in a few sensors and gives you the wiring for that. Does not come with the sensors. So we did need to buy a couple of pressure sensors and coolant sensor, but you can also just use oil pressure sensors off of an LS. You can grab those at the back of a scrapyard engine anywhere, and you've got pressure sensors that way. But that it was more on the expensive side. And the Holley EGT sensor was $250. It plugs into your exhaust, make sure that you're not gonna nuke any of your pistons prematurely, or as Elon Musk calls it, a rapid, unscheduled disassembly of whatever you built. Now that we had to weld in the new firewall, we did have to pull our windshield. There was a crack in there, and we replaced the windshield. That was $350. But you might not have to do that. If you are doing any welding, make sure you cover it, because the welding splatter burns in there instantly. You can't clean it. It's really annoying, especially for your wipers. When it's hitting all those specs, it does not clean it. Ask me how I know. Luckily it wasn't my truck and I was just a co-op student, but cover your windshield when you're welding. All right, so our F-150 came with this chintzy little small console, so we ended up buying a 2016 F350 Super Duty console, which is super nice. It's got leather on it, but those are not cheap. We searched around everywhere. It was actually the same as we paid for the entire interior. It was $1,400 and change by the time it came to our door, but that's just what we wanted. We wanted a nice big dash in there. All the brackets to mount it did not come with it. The heating duct that goes into the back passengers did not come with it as well. Add all those up, there's another $300 in small miscellaneous parts, and that does not include the thing to make 110 volts at the back passengers either. We'll work on that later. We also do not have heated seats, and we had to bypass the memory button so that just the switches work to make it go forward and back. The Milwaukee batteries I already had, so we're not gonna include those in the price, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, that's kind of an ongoing joke, but truth be told, they're still in there. I will get to them. Okay, so we did want tilt steering because the way that the dash was, it was a little awkward. We got that off eBay as a sponsored item, but I think it went for about $150 to $200. The most expensive thing was buying the steering wheel. The steering wheel came with it, but not the center section. You cannot ship airbags across the border. So we had to buy an airbag that was OEM. We could not find any locally, and that was $383 for the airbag that we will never use, but at least it fills that big gaping hole in your steering wheel. With the dash coming out of the F550, the console coming out of a 2016, certain options weren't available. We ended up buying the center section, which was like a rosemary wood, whatever, off of eBay or something. We want to match all that, so there's this overlay that you put on top, and once we have everything dialed down and fixed up, then we'll put that on. That was $627. We also bought the brake controller and the auxiliary switches, which were not in our truck, and those were 50 bucks off eBay as well, and those all got shipped to the door for that cost. We did do a body lift on the truck, 6 in the back, 6, 12, so that was $12 because we just used hockey pucks. Some states and provinces that's not legal, and it says made in Canada. It's good quality rubber, it's no problem. We needed to lift that body up just a hair to clearance the engine underneath the hood and underneath the firewall there. With the F550 firewall, it does bring the hump farther back, so there's plenty of room for that cat, but it is possible to put the cat in the original firewall, but you do have to beat it with a hammer pretty hard. That being said, it's hard to get into the truck now because it is a little bit higher. So we bought step bars for $250. I did hook the air suspension up to the door sensors, so when you open the door, the truck sinks down. And I do want to put air cylinders on the steps as well, have them hide away, so when you close the door, they tuck away. When you open the door, they open up. That's kind of neat because it works off of power off of the interior light. So when you unlock the door with your remote, the interior light comes on, so then you open the door and the steps come down. When you close the truck, you've got 10 minutes that interior light stays on. You can open and close the door a couple times and the truck still goes up and down and the steps still come in and out. For now, I think this summer, just because I don't have time to do the air ride on it, we'll just put the steps on for $250 and we'll work on the air ride system this winter, which will add another cost, but we don't know that cost right now. Batteries were $300 and the cables along with it, probably another 100 bucks for all of the fittings and the cable to go with that. So to protect our fuel system, we put a FAS on there. That's $800, but that allowed us to move our fuel filters to our frame rail and allowed us to weld our own intake manifold to really open up that air into that back and front cylinders. If you see the intake manifold on a 3126 is puny and the air has to go around a corner to get to the front and back cylinders, we've opened that right up and it looks much, much nicer. Intake didn't really cost us anything. That was just metal that we had laying around. And we did have Oshkosh cut the flange for us that we welded our plates to. Oshkosh is an amazing sponsor of the channel, so they did that pro bono for us, but that would set you back about 100 bucks. Now to keep our engine cool, we bought an intercooler for a 6-liter, I believe, off of Summit, and that was $300. And the radiator came from Flexolite, but Flexolite discontinued making radiators. Very disappointing because they have a really neat design with the way their fins work. That thing does not run hot at all, but they discontinued it. That being said, it was not a cheap radiator, which is why they stopped making them, because they couldn't compete. When it comes down to cost, most people go for the cheapest option, not the best option. I do think that this was one of the higher end radiators. I think it went for about 1,800 bucks, to be honest. The exhaust is a kit from Lyle's. It's basically a do-it-yourself kit. Comes with the 4-inch tailpipe going over top of the axle and around the corner, and the rest you just kind of make up. With the muffler, no cats on it, that would set you back about 600 bucks on a 4-inch. All right, so for the interior, we did not buy new carpet yet. I think we will, but one cost that I would do before the carpet was the Be Quiet insulation. That was firewall, that was inside on the floor. That's a sticky mat that you put on, and another mat that goes over top of the inside, and then something along the firewall, and it works amazing. Super quiet in there. The only thing I hear is my Hydro Boost, and I'm working on that, but I tried a couple different things yet with no success, but we'll get that figured out. But highly recommend sound deadening. Everybody else inside the cab will love it. Now to spice up the outside of the truck, for now we're not doing anything crazy. We're not building a SEMA truck, we're not lifting it, putting massive rims and tires and all that goofy stuff on there. We wanted a nice looking stock truck that you can tell is a little bit souped up. So we went with Complete Performance headlights. Those were running about $400, and the taillights $269. Just clear everything up, lets you see much better than those foggy old lights that were in there. Highly recommend it. So far I haven't had anybody flashing me, telling telling me that they're annoying either. So that works out really, really well. We also have just LED bulbs in those limo style arm bars on the cab. Oh, you gotta have those. If you're driving an OBS and you don't have limo style handlebars on the side, you're missing out. Those bulbs are a couple bucks a piece. The sill plates and the tailgate panel were made by a company called Built Not Bought. The sill plates were $190 and the tailgate panel was $335. Now to top off the tailgate panel, we had Oshcut laser cut the words Caterpillar into it instead of it saying platinum. We went with too thick of a material, so we had to cut those in half, but that would put you back about $100 from Oshcut. All right, that's the major stuff that we could think of kind of going through the truck, but there's so many things that are not on that list. Safety, alignment, small little fittings, and little knickknacks that you run to town for, little butt connectors and this and that you don't account for. But when we built the 55, all the small pieces that we were missing for that set us back about $2,000. It would be roughly about the same for this truck. Even though you don't think about it, there's gonna be a couple grand that you didn't even know you spent on your project, and we did the same. We're no different than anybody else. Okay, so I've done quite a few Cummins swaps, and I could do a nice Cummins swap into, say, my 05 Silverado in about 70 hours. Take me about a week and a half, and I got you a beautiful running Cummins truck. Now, we did a lot extra into this truck. I figure I have about 800 hours into the truck, and that's everything from the minute I started working on it to when it finished. I helped Scott with the engine build a little bit. That doesn't include the hours it took to drive it home, all of that fun stuff. But if you were to pay a shop for $100 an hour to build you a truck like this, that's $80,000 right there. So I have had people come up to me and email and say, I want you to build the exact same truck for me. I've got open checkbook. I want that truck. Money's not an object. That would be roughly where that price is, excluding all of the pieces that we've already told you about. It gets really expensive when you have to pay somebody else. That being said, we have a very expensive truck. If you add up all of the cost of the materials and all the labor, roughly $80,000. We have a very expensive truck that we would not be able to insure for the cost that we have into it. But there's a silver lining. We have a YouTube channel, and this is how we make money. We make content and we make revenue off of that. That pays our bills. We have extra bills on top of that, the cost to edit all the videos, the cost of talking to all the companies that sponsor us. About $10,000 US was sponsored product. The rest came out of our pocket. Now you're thinking to yourself, well, I'm not a famous YouTuber and I am pretty handy and I could do it for a lot less. And you are absolutely right. You absolutely can do it a lot cheaper. Don't rebuild the engine. Don't do everything that we did. Don't replace all your injectors and your turbo, and don't put a new interior in it with all the wiring and all that. Absolutely. But I would still say the bare minimum to do the swap in this style of truck, or say it was in a GM or an old Dodge, it would be $10,000. If anybody says that they're doing it less, they're not thinking about all those little things, all those extras that add up. They're getting stellar deals as well, and that's what you want. If you're building something that you want, it gets a lot more expensive than what you have laying around. So when we were building all of our trucks, it's not what you need, it's what you have available. The Cat was available to us, the F350 was available to us, all those sorts of things. So keep that in mind. When you happen to stumble across a good deal, take it, put it in the yard, tell the missus it's for somebody else and you're just storing it. But if you're looking for stuff, like having to have the transfer case ready for a show and having to have that back in a couple weeks, it's really expensive. If you happen to know somebody or you have the time on a weekend and you can just buy the parts, you could do it for a lot less, but you get caught in that thing. So bare minimum, there's unable to do it any other way, $10,000, and I still, of all the things, highly recommend that you rebuild that transmission at Excalibur. That's still a stellar deal, and that's half of that budget right there. So just keep that in mind. Now, was it worth it? If you were to pay somebody to do it, you do have a unique truck, and you have a one-of-a-kind that turns heads wherever you go. It turned out exactly the way that I wanted it to, and it does what I needed to do, and I wouldn't change anything about it. I wouldn't put a Cummins in it, I wouldn't put something else into it. We have a one-of-a-kind truck that is a one-of-one that you cannot buy, and would be hard-pressed to build the way we did. If you were to do it in your own driveway the exact same way, and you have a full-time job, that is a huge commitment to be able to do that, but we are able to subsidize that with our income off of YouTube. Now, that being said, the revenue that we made from that does not cover the whole truck, but it doesn't put us in the hole either. We'll leave it at that. I really don't like talking exact numbers. We had a friend from Europe come over and he says, why does everybody have to share how much stuff costs? And it's like, I bought a new sweater. It was only $5 at the Value Village. Well, good for you. Like, I don't care. I got a great deal on these shoes. Good for you. I don't care. But I do want you guys to realize what goes into a build. And when you start, that you need to have the amount of time and the amount of budget available when you're building something like this. We did the same video on the Kenworth, and a lot of people appreciated that. Thank you for being honest. And if we had to do it again, we absolutely would. I love that truck. It is not my quickly going to town truck, but it's my everything else truck. If like, town for me is only 3 minutes away. The diesel doesn't really warm up. It's not great to hop in the diesel and go there. The engine's not even up to temperature by the time I get back. But everywhere else, I love that thing. We've got a couple thousand kilometers on it now, and super, super happy with it. It seems to be one of the favorite ones on our channel. There will be more videos on it as well. I've got lots of finishing touches to do to it, but it is running and going down the road, so we're enjoying it as it is and finishing up all the other projects that we're doing in the summer. We bought a boat, so we're gonna do the boat engine. A lot more coming out on the Audi, and we're still tuning with that. We got a great video coming out on that. We've got some tank stuff happening again. The guys from the Tank Museum are coming down to work on Shermanator. We got the Lowboy going together for that. So we need to prioritize our time and our projects according to our weather as well. When it gets cold, we won't be driving the truck in the winter anymore. We can go over it and have some fun with it in the winter again. There will be more videos on it. It's not going to stop. But remember, if you don't get out there and work on it, if you don't commit yourself to X amount of hours per week, per day to work on it, you have to enjoy it. You have to be able to get the satisfaction out of it. Do it in steps. Don't look at the whole project all at once. If I knew what I was getting into when I started it, I'd probably still do it. But it's very daunting to say, I need to find 800 hours and I need to find $80,000 to build this truck. But if you say, you know what, I need 50 hours to complete this part of the project, and then I can put that out of my head and finish it, and I need 50 hours to do that, it's able to break those projects up into something that's satisfying each step of the way and encouraging for the next step in the project. So I hope that makes sense to you guys. As always, put your rides on our website, DEBOSSgarage.com. So submit your project, and we'd love to get your projects on the channel. We do that all the time. We've got locals, we've got them from all over the continent, and hopefully we can do that in other countries as well. But if you put your address in there, you never know when we might be in the area. You might get a phone call or an email saying, hey, meet us at this spot, or can we come to your place, and we'll get your rides on the channel, because we want to encourage you guys to do it. On that website as well, you get discounts to all the companies that we work with. So a lot of the prices that we pay is what you guys get as well. So definitely check that out. The membership fee easily covers the savings that you get on higher ticket items like exhaust and whatever else. So thanks for watching, guys. Lots more good stuff coming out, and we love each and every one of you guys. Get out there and work on it, because if you're not filthy, you're not rich. Here we go.